So first of all, our expectation and our hope was to use a brand new front end architecture, and I think you hit all of the points. I think the quick integration, multiple endpoint was awesome.
I guess what was interesting too is like when we worked with your team pretty extensively in the proof of concept and talking to Jaden and others. I mean, a lot of the feedback when we were working in that environment was around sort of dev velocity, right? Like we were kind of accelerating timelines and things. So I was just curious, like, is there any way, like if you kind of look back when you were sort of prior to making that migration happen, you're on ATG, you take the job at Zenni, you're sort of looking out the window saying, okay, how are we going to go from where we are to where we need to be? Was there like an original timeline that you had in mind, and then maybe one that was ended up being a bit faster that was reality?
Yeah, I could tell you that Vue Storefront definitely like shaved at least 50% off of our dev timeline. So we're a fairly skilled and fast team. So we had really good chemistry working with each other. Other things that stood out too was that portability of the backend platform. So maybe we could talk about the real future. Like right now we have the near term future, which everything is, you help us power to, right? The real near distance future is that I feel like most of the e-commerce companies actually miss a spot. They don't understand the economics of operating e-commerce, where margins razor thin, and then how could you help that ecosystem? So what happened is most headless commerce systems charge a percentage of revenue type of model, right? We talked about this. I think it adds a super high amount of friction when we try to scale as a company to a certain extent. We have aspiration to be at $1 billion revenue per year by like 2025. And with that, if you think about it, that just becomes not affordable. So I actually think like there is a play here where we could use like Vue Storefront, where the code, a lot of our intellectual assets is actually on your framework, the UI and the user tier, and then we build out the microservices infrastructure, but that becomes more portable as I hope like more options becomes available. Like I said, Zenni is going to explore doing something there and hopefully open sourcing it. And then I do think like there could be options where when those options are available, you become more valuable in the ecosystem.
When you guys think about sort of, and I love picking your brain because I think, I'm like, okay, so as a CTO, when you're looking out, is optionality, is it cost? I know cost is high up in terms of priorities of trying to make sure you're getting at the right place, but in terms of kind of lowering risk of projects going wrong or timelines getting out of whack and resources kind of falling short, is it that like optionality of kind of having an agnostic front end, is that a big benefit to
It's
sort
a
of
huge
in that
benefit.
direction?
Yeah, because going back to the dev velocity, the other part is availability of the dev resources. So if we want to code on top of ATG, that's JSP, like really old school type of code base, and really want to not code there. So thinking about those as wrapped up in services and leveraging your back end, your front end, it's really front end as a service, right? So if you think about it, it's just like microservices in the back end, but really treating front end the same way and allowing more developer to make that code accessible is key. And I think that's actually the strongest pitch that you have is that it's very little code and very simple code to get started. And then as you evolve your ecosystem, you have these modules. It's a richer set and more configurable set that could be used to get most of the use cases up and running quickly. And I think like I think your development roadmap is right on, and I feel like it serves a good need for the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think like for us, what we see is kind of each of those pieces helping in terms of acceleration. Obviously, the storefront UI can be helpful, but the API orchestration and those integrations that we have tend to give people a leg up, and as opposed to kind of
that's a huge key. Yeah. So like, for example, like if I went from ATG to say Magento, that should
Mm,
be like a 6 month project, right? Getting it
right.
done like pretty much in a week and a half with a
Yeah.
team is just like amazing, right? Just seeing that richness and integration actually paid off for us. So we had that portability, which is good for like for me, like as a leader, these e-commerce platform, it's going to get dated somehow, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes, and then we could see that portability as being key, where we're not held hostage to any like e-commerce platform.
Well, it seemed like you guys actually had sort of this mindset that I try to oftentimes indoctrinate others into, which was that you kind of came to the table somewhat front end first, because the way you thought about pulling it together, you sort of started with the front end and kind of worked backwards to commerce. So, but I think back to the optionality that is provided by starting that way and approaching the project that way, you guys really kind of proved it, and we're showing, I think in a matter of what 2 or 3 weeks, you had, I think, 2 different engines up and running, perhaps 3 actually.
Yeah. And then that speaks to the power of your platform, right? So when I looked at it, that front end as a service, that's really the power of your platform, where you focus on the user experience. I believe that's a key, right? At the end of the day, I'm not going to be like a Yahoo tomorrow or like a Google tomorrow. So that scalability, that infinite horizontally scaling architecture is not top of mind. But then getting that user experience perfect first is key. In being able to iterate and throw new experiences out there and get those tested is key. So that going back to that dev velocity, if you can make us like 2x faster, that's just so much competitive advantage against like somebody else, just like, that we're competing against, like that work in the archaic tool set. There's just no way that they're going to be able to keep up.
Totally. And I think that's a great point, is like the velocity, of course, on the development side of, just having pre-built components, having some of the things that are already there for you to really shorten timeline. But I think, the theme of velocity goes on, throughout the performance too. Obviously, time is money on getting the experience to market.
Yeah.
But then also having it sort of built in a way that tends to have pretty fast load times. I think you guys are doing really well with site speed.
If you look at it, we switched search engines too. We went from Sitecore to
Yeah.
Algolia, right? In addition to the
Yeah.
switching to the
I know we're
commerce engine.
downplaying that. We're acting like it's
Oh
just
yeah, we don't
like
even talk about that, right?
it's massive. I mean, yeah, you're
Yeah.
full upgrade on content search and really on commerce.
Oh yeah. So if you think about it, our backend essentially was overhauled, but then that front end
Right.
experience was preserved. That was like crazy good, right? And
Yeah.
then because we're not happy with our search results on the old search platform, we're working with Algolia, and it got faster too through that decision to search Algolia, right? But then
Yeah.
going back to that whole integration tier, that whole decoupling, and then what you built into your enterprise stack, it's just a configuration for us. And then right now we're going through a 3 months migration on our old code base just to
Mhm.
get Algolia in, right? And it is
Yeah.
a really good set of people. And it just give you some economics. Like that project likely is going to cost us about $250,000 to
Okay.
port from, say, Sitecore to Algolia and make sure all of the pages from all of the historical don't break through the process. We're not even talking about the tuning yet.
Right. Right.
It's just really like porting, like that whole thing is a configuration for you.
Mm.
It's like $250,000 value if you don't do it like a front end as a service type pattern. The part that the journey that's really interesting too was going back to the front end. We felt like it is really difficult to move our existing user because the code base is so old. Coming up with a new experience will take us a year to implement the new experience on the old platform.
Mm.
But then building on top of your platform, we essentially have our next generation mobile web version
Yeah.
already done, right? So
Exactly.
now we're slowly releasing it, we're testing it, and then it's more of a process of how do we create continuity within that test, and then with them where the modern platform is ready, where the business is not ready, versus usually the other way around. When you talk about something, you have to wait a year, then the
Right.
platform is ready, right? the thing that we took was a very adventurous approach, and I would ask people to think about that. Is we asked ourselves, what is the perfect shopping experience? And
Mm,
we built from there. So when we were trying to revamp and then just disrupt everything we did, we basically left no legacy and we just reinvented on top of Vue Storefront. And we know like if we had to restore certain functionality to what we have today, we could do it very quickly on top of your platform, but we didn't compromise our user experience from the get-go, tied down with legacy versus more kind of like in a sandbox that you can build
mm,
whatever you feel is the best for the customer and then act like a startup
yeah.
for a period of time. And then for people who are on ATG, likely they're just like Zenni, been
Yeah.
around for a while. They're, the business is probably thriving, very established, but then you should take this journey to rethink of it as this is an opportunity to move to the next phase of your internet presence and experience, and then really just be imaginative, be disruptive, be just like when you're in a garage creating your business for the first time.
I love that. I love that. It's actually an opportunity. I'm sure people have gone through the full emotional roller coaster of seeing the announcement from ATG, but maybe we can transform it into sort of a positive opportunity to innovate. I think you guys definitely did that, and you've been like
Yes.
incredibly agile. I always forget that you're as big of a business as you guys are because you move
Yeah.
like a startup.
Yeah. We're at a 400 million annual revenue right now.
Mhm.
So being able to feel like a startup, it's actually the highest form of praise for me.
I love it. That's it, man. And I love that insight too of saying starting with the perfect experience, because I really think so many people forget about that piece, and it's the thing that drives the whole show. So
Yeah, and then one more thing I want to mention is like there's a sandbox experience that's there with ATG, right? So they kind of force you to this particular flow. So when you're on Vue Storefront, you can break that flow and you can be adventurous. And this is what I meant is that if you're not doing it, somebody else is doing it. They probably could serve the demographic better. And then this is going back to the importance of reinventing yourself periodically. That's why you don't want to be disrupted.
I love that. And we hope that we can kind of be that net, that bridge, if you will, that can allow you the freedom of all of that flexibility while at the same time reducing the risk, right? Because of course, it is a whole new world that you're moving into. And so I think it gives you the best of both worlds of having the freedom to innovate while at the same time having a lot of proven components there to keep your risk very low.
Yeah, and then if I look at from a total cost of ownership, the other aspect of being 2x velocity is
Mhm.
that everything's half as cheap, right? So
Yeah.
the dev costs, right? So and then developers are hard to find. So that's the issue is that they want to have fun and see what they build be in production very quickly. So there's added benefit to it. That's something you probably can work with your marketing team on,
Yep.
and then just really outline that that speed translate to cost saving and also that whole enjoyment for the developers because they become more engaged in building versus
Yeah.
just
Huge piece.
slot through like the business as usual, right?
I love that. That's a really good point in terms of, and I hadn't even thought about developers being more engaged, right? Like, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's a great
yeah.
call out.
That's because when you're fast and you see things moving, your teammates are moving fast
Yeah, it
to
feels
you
good.
to, yeah, it feels good. And then you only live once, right? So when you had to sit there and then just wait for like a monthly code deploy, it just doesn't feel as good. But it's like you just real time build in less than a minute, boom, deploy to production and see your code live and see that data streaming in right away. So the best developers won't work for a legacy company. So
Mm,
that's actually something that you should talk about with your marketing team to really
yeah,
educate the developer, like speaking in the developer tongues, like it's actually brings greater joy in being fast.
that's huge. We'll definitely go deeper on that. And I think like when you really think about it, it's fascinating because, and it makes perfect sense. If you have a great developer experience, it's going to cause great customer experiences.
Exactly. You see like a customer getting stuck and then you can push a solution out there right
Yeah.
away, helping that cohort of people. And then that feels good, right?
Of kind of, people like you that are sort of looking out at a decision and just saying, how do I make a good decision? How do I, reduce my risk? And what's the sort of the riskiest thing, I guess, in this thing? And what I'd really like that you called out around the opportunity is an idea that came to mind is that if you are on ATG right now and looking at it and trying to decide what to do, maybe the riskiest thing is to not take the opportunity to innovate.
That's exactly it, because somebody else would maybe actually doing that next gen experience and taking business away from you.